Most of my favourite games often fall into one of two categories. The first is good old survival horror, and the second is the weirdest games that could have ever been made. Every so often, those lines between the eerie and the bizarre are blurred, and sometimes it's difficult to put a game into any kind of category. And that's the case with Babbdi. Babbdi throws you into the town of the same name, first welcoming the player with a view of a long concrete corridor, with disjointed patches of light and darkness. The sight of another person pulls you into the room on your right, introducing you to a lone man sitting in a room consisting only of a chair, table, and 2 mattresses. The incessant humming of the air conditioning or light fixture preventing any possible silence in the desperately empty residence. The sickly-looking neighbour turns to you and speaks in garbled tones, staring intently with his empty eyes, and offering you the club lying on the filthy mattress in the opposite corner. The other rooms you enter are not much different. Dismal furniture and pallid creatures are fixed into place, the only thing disrupting the visual stillness being their heads turning a full 360 if it means maintaining eye contact with you, violently locking onto you as soon as you're close enough. Something quickly feels wrong about this place, and had you not read the game's description or achievements, the people you speak to will make it clear that your goal is to leave Babbdi. You'll descend in elevators, catching glimpses of seemingly endless hallways with no rooms. You'll wander through spaces of complete darkness, search entire floors of buildings devoid of any sign of life, and be swallowed by an oppressive stillness that you uncomfortably break with your own footsteps. Often your movement will cause echoes so loud it feels like the whole town can hear you, and you can only hope there's nothing sinister lurking in the surrounding shadows. There are structures and architectural choices that make no sense in this walled-off district. Filthy water, pale grass, rusted metal, and weathered concrete make up for almost the entirety of Babbdi's textural variety. I remember looking across from a balcony and seeing a window with someone watching me. As I plucked up the courage to make my way into the room, it turned out it was a doll propped up against the wall, horrifically with a face on both the front and back of its head. A solitary stereo stood in the corner, playing music for these life-size, lifeless figures with their blank, unmoving expressions. The suffocating uncertainty of what exactly you're going to find behind the next corner adds weight to every step you take in this forsaken place. This city presents you with elements of uneasy horror in so many ways, and yet Babbdi gave me a sense of comfort. As I made my way through the vacant homes, I started to realise nothing could hurt me, relinquishing my nerves over time as even a fall from the highest point would not damage me. And thank God for that, because there are some serious health and safety violations all over the place. What looks like protruding beams make up for platforms between floors of buildings, and staircases are sometimes replaced with loose crates and old furniture. Knowing there was no real threat, I began exploring this town with confidence, using any tools at my disposal to jump, climb, and fly across this almost grayscale playground. You can zip around on a motorbike, cruising through concrete valleys and making a whole lot of obnoxious revving sounds. You're even able to use a handheld propeller to reach new heights, gliding to any corner of Babbdi you wish to visit. It's through this liberating traversal you're able to notice the odd intricacies, like certain wall textures being purposefully low-res in comparison to others, lone chairs nestled between structures, or a singular string of fairy lights making up for what is probably Babbdi's most colourful room. There are textures made up of AI art slurry, depicting dystopian images of news anchors and whatever this is. On the other hand, there's actual art and real books found on shelves, contrasting the odd inhuman visual vomit occupying certain textures. There is nothing about Babbdi that feels modern. Even its most contemporary-looking technology is running on literal microwaves and an oven. Words on signs make no sense, or are chaotically misspelled at best. giving the impression this virtual space was scribbled together, but with perfect surreal intent. During your stay in the town, you'll have the chance to find secret objects, which are mostly made up of several brands of cigarettes, truly some of Babbdi's greatest treasures. Other interactable items also include a piano and a trumpet, which you can play to your heart's content. You may even stumble into a particular hallway that looks like it doesn't even belong in Babbdi, with patterned flooring, plush rugs, wooden paneling, and doors. The fact this normal-looking corridor exists in the town was more shocking than anything else I found, which really goes to show how bizarre things can be. You won't go more than a minute or two exploring without being surprised by what you'll see next. The aesthetic of liminal spaces has been overwhelmingly popular in recent years, with the internet practically littered with vacant rooms, hallways, and areas like shopping malls, typically populated with people now presented with an uneasy absence of life. Liminality, by definition in this context, applies to transitory spaces, like staircases or parking lots. Although this rule isn't strictly adhered to when it comes to the liminal images floating around online. The intensity of these pictures primarily concentrates on their nostalgic nature. These visions are often layered with the grainy, dreamlike haze of digital cameras in the early 2000s, emulating the qualities of a childhood photo album of those who grew up in and around the 90s to late 2000s. Interior design also reflects this period, with spaces frequently adorned with outdated carpet patterns and features that have long since been renounced in the design of any modern space. They're the kind of places you don't really see anymore, now only existing somewhere deep in your memory, until it's awoken again by a photo of an unoccupied, dimly lit restaurant, stuck in a time period that we can't get back. These surreal, motionless spaces are unsettling yet peaceful. In Babbdi, you're one of the only things that really moves in the town. Almost all the inhabitants' bodies are cemented in their positions. Even the dog is static. Pretty much the rest of the movement you can observe here belongs to the pigeons, and the trio dancing in the sewers. It very much feels like a space that is frozen in time in multiple ways, quite literally both through its visual stillness and its vacancy, but also through the game's very premise. Babbdi is a transitory space. As soon as we enter, we know we must leave. There's no invitation to stay for long. It's a bleak place to live in, and there are only a dozen people in this veritable ghost town. There's barely any privacy, as almost all homes lack any doors and are just openings in public hallways. The harshness of the architecture is exemplified by a resident basking in the one slither of sunlight that manages to fight its way through the cluster of tall buildings. Jutting structures and forms create dense pockets of shadows cutting through any artificial or natural light. This very style of construction brings about a thick atmosphere on its own. Babbdi's architectural style is that of Brutalism, which emerged during the 1950s in the UK, and is characterised by its use of concrete, steel, and structural elements consisting of geometric shapes. Funnily enough, the brutalist architecture of Babbdi finally pushed me to go visit the Barbican in London, which felt like being transported back in time. Although unlike the now very trendy raw concrete of this estate, Babbdi isn't presented as a chic hotspot, but almost like a prison. Comfort was never an option in the town, and the only natural instinct could be to leave by design. Even brutalist architecture in the real world was undesirable at a point, with many structures and estates now lost to the past generation's contempt for these post-war designs, with even King Charles III once calling a proposed extension to the National Gallery
like a monstrous carbuncle on the face of a much-loved and elegant friend,
and similarly opposed several other modernist design plans for buildings in London, which, much like the gallery extension, were all cancelled. The disdain for these buildings stems from a few factors. These designs were commonly used as relatively inexpensive and quick ways to build social housing. employed in the post-war reconstruction effort. In itself, it's perhaps a reminder of the country's hardships, or even political associations. But also, the nature of the concrete meant that obvious weathering and decay was not only inevitable, but too inefficient and costly to fix. These buildings essentially gave you an ultimatum: either revere them in all their imperfect concrete glory, or knock them down. The visual identity of Brutalism now aligns itself with a feeling of nostalgia, harbouring more and more admirers over the course of several decades. And now many Brutalist structures in the UK are Grade 2 listed, meaning that they are of special architectural and historic interest and deserving of protection. However, a good handful of buildings were not so lucky to have endured that period of unappreciation. The sentimentality of old interior designs claimed in the liminal aesthetic and also the scorned brutalist buildings are both lost to time, demolished and existing only in memory or photo like a ghost, until it's awoken again by playing Babbdi. The history of Babbdi is as uncertain as its future. What will happen to Babbdi once the inhabitants are gone? Will it be knocked down, or repurposed into a stylish monument of architectural history? Perhaps, given enough time, Babbdi will mutate from eyesore to artifact, but can it even survive that long? The only thing we know for sure is what we experienced in our brief time in this place. Having spoken to the developers, who consist of two brothers, they revealed that they actually didn't have as much intention behind certain choices as I initially believed. Babbdi was originally meant to be a quick game for a game jam, and was heavily influenced by chill exploration titles like Sludge Life, and the general atmosphere of Paratopic. However, the developer duo did not intend for it to be a horror game by any stretch, and even the use of brutalism wasn't as deliberate as I assumed, but rather stemmed from the aim to make simple buildings and textures, with an industrial and ominous touch, although they did express a general fascination in dense urban concrete jungles. The simplicity of the developer's thought process behind the game made me think of how real liminal spaces are, naturally occurring and originally built with a purpose that doesn't have anything to do with having it become an eerie image on the internet. They're just meant for shopping, parking cars, or simply walking through. So in that way, Babbdi is as authentically liminal in aesthetic as virtual spaces get. As far as lore goes, the devs explained that the city was probably filled with inhabitants before, but is now just dead and forgotten, probably because of an economic crisis. People are allowed to leave, but the city lies between a giant dam and a wall, so it's blocked off and only reachable by canal or train. However, the former no longer serves traffic, and there are no more train tickets for sale. And maybe it's the sense of isolation that I personally found soothing, as when I deemed Babbdi as safe from the inside, I knew it was secure from any outside threats as well. The distinctive look of the characters of the game comes from the art style of one of the devs, and seeing their Instagram profile really highlights the origins of the unsettling ashen appearance of Babbdi's residents. The blank white eyes and limited colour palettes with their greyish desaturation create an instantly recognisable design for these creepy little characters. Babbdi's surrealism more than makes up for its simplicity. There's a unique strangeness that you won't find elsewhere. It has an atmosphere so thick it doesn't matter what the gameplay is like or if there's any real story. It's a game that almost instinctively creeps into horror, yet it's also a game that offers a sense of comfort. That coziness that could be presented in a typical way is turned on its head, showcasing a kind of liminal, nostalgic, and imperfect estate of bizarre wonders. As oppressive as its structures are, the movement around it is almost limitless. With no combat or dangers, the player is able to explore freely and at their own pace. Using the numerous tools at your disposal, you can experience the full liberty of travels, sliding down viciously steep corridors and platforming across hazardous gaps. Overall, the developers have been surprised at the overwhelmingly positive reception to Babbdi, considering the fairly niche genre it falls under, as well as being what they described as not a polished game. Although I have to say the lack of polish actually added to the atmosphere in the end. The developers are currently working on a 1v1 online multiplayer first-person shooter, and the sequel to Babbdi, so I suggest following their work if the contents of this video interest you. The biggest praise I can give Babbdi is that it got me to leave the house, attempting to find those same feelings I got from this virtual world in the real one. It's a game that so effortlessly feels like no other, despite its lack of intricacies, or rather, because of it. Thanks to the developers of Babbdi for offering some insight into the creation of the game. And of course, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see any of my future work when it's out, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications, just so you don't miss anything. Okay, bye.